Madam Speaker, let me come to the fine print of this budget. Now, this is the last budget before the fall of this government. And I don't want to be nasty, but I'm sure the fall of this government will not be as eventful as the fall of the Berlin Wall. And this budget, not only in my humble opinion, but in the opinion of shapers and movers of policies, this budget is a non-event, un budget de sans vision et sans dimension. According to a young, promising political analyst whose views are much sought after. No. I'm sure you read the reader's column of Le Mauricien, a young man by the name of Avinash Manohar. Now, what is it that we want to do? We don't want to make Mauritius small. We want to make Mauritius great. And this budget is neither provocative nor challenging. If anything, it has created uncertainty. It is not because the regime has escaped the purview of the IMF this time that all is well, Madame la Marquise. And tell us how we are going to order threats, grasp opportunities in a world where there is no free lunch. Now, none of us want to be a citizen of a republic which will be at the beck and call of any global power. Certainly, none of us want our country ever to be a basket case. We all love our country. And we should not make our country the Oliver Twist of this world, asking for more and more grants and concessionary loans. The leader of the opposition did not miss the opportunity to inform us that a loan can be a poison chalice. Fundamentals, Madam Speaker, have to be addressed, and the budget fails to do so. There is chaos in our budget. Debt contracting is escaping the purview of Parliament. And this regime is bequeathing a legacy of debt to our kids. Interest on total public debt represent $3 billion annually. I'm sure we do realize the number of projects which could be implemented if we had saved on interest payment. And with the litany of projects whose viabilities have not been tested and are off budget, there is no effective consolidated fund. Has the tramway project or Safe City project been under tight scrutiny of Parliament? And several questions have been put on this side of the House to obtain as much information as possible in the spirit of transparency and accountability. We are, unfortunately, Madam Speaker, in a fix and are receding as a middle-income country, and from middle-income trap, we will fall into debt trap diplomacy. Sri Lanka, Kenya have indeed stories to tell. Our economy is indeed in a state of emergency. I'm not the one who's saying it. I'm sure many of our friends read comments made by a young director of Pricewaterhouse. What he stated is the obvious to the investors. And in our zeal to attract investment, much needs to be done to restore confidence. Confidence, Madam Speaker, is the very pinnacle, the backbone of to attract investment. Should I remind what Mr. Pierre Dina said, that we need reserves to mop up liquidity? And these people, whether he's Mr. Manohar, Pierre Dina, or Liang Xing, they are not members of the Labour Party. They've spoken the mind, and there are many like-minded economists and accountants, trade unionists, traders, entrepreneurs, members of the civil societies who have expressed serious debt over the debt issue and its impact upon the effective value of the rupee, that is our purchasing power. Will our rupee depreciate vis-à-vis a basket of currencies? If so, by how much? It has become the subject of conversation throughout the country, and they are worried. People are worried over the legacy that will be bequeathed to the next generation, and there are clouds looming over the pension, over the sustainability of pension. Nothing is mentioned on aging workforce. We are talking of our way of life and the fear that lifetime savings will lose its value. It is the independence of institution of Kwango which is at stake. The Minister of Finance called his shot. Monetary policy has surrendered to fiscal policy, and it goes against the best practice. And what are we told? Today we read in the paper that Mr. Padayachi is now the new guru and potential candidate in constituency number 8. He's not worried about saving his deposit because we are informed that he juggles billions in forex and rupees. And he is under the spell of a master illusionist, my good friend Dave Manraj, at a time when serious thought should be given to Fiscal Responsibility Act and Freedom of Information Act. The Prime Minister has opted for memes.
Member, I would ask you to refrain from mentioning people who are not in the assembly and who cannot defend themselves. Please.
I was simply quoted what the press stated, although it is allowed to quote on. Madam Speaker, I bow to your ruling, and I hope the murmur will stop. The country is going downhill, and our friends are toxic with praises. I seem to have the impression that many do not understand the gravity of the situation. And I'm not surprised of the lavish praise being heaped upon the Prime Minister by ministers and backbenchers. Even in the Democratic Republic of Korea, they are more moderate. By all means, let us all show some restraint. Perhaps the race to be fielded as candidate for election are on. So I can understand everyone vying to attract the good attention of the Prime Minister. But in vying for tickets, some of them are elbowing out their friends, and many of them are dagger-drawn. The charade of unity which they display is grotesque. Madam Speaker, on Monday, writ will be issued for by-election in constituency number 7. I'm sure the Prime Minister is feeling the pulse of the electorate, and the consensus in the country at this very moment is dissolution of Parliament. And I invite him to muster the courage and face the electorate. What is legal, Madam Speaker, Prime Minister knows is not legitimate. The legitimacy of the office and the power of Prime Minister is not transferred, but gained through the ballot box. What the electorate give, the electorate can take away. The electorate does not confer a permanent status upon any one of us. I advise the Prime Minister to bow to the wish of the electorate. This time, there is no running away. L'Alliance Les Peuples run away from the election in constituency number 18. The government chose to postpone local government election by way of controversial amendment to the Local Government Act. There is a political and economic urgency. And in the name of democracy, the government, the Prime Minister should go for dissolution. Enough is enough. Only a new government can redress the economy. There is an urgency to think globally and act locally, to consolidate existing sectors and to look at emerging sectors. Madam Speaker, the proceeds from our export has been decreasing since the last 4 years, and only petty cash in an ocean of debt has been left for distribution across the board. What is needed is a reversal of policy to come up with a new economic model. In many quarters, the budget was greeted with derision and disbelief. The budget, I'm sorry to say, is divisive. I'm sorry to say it goes against nation building. More than 400,000 workers of the private sector have been left out. I'm sure many of us have heard Jane Ragu crying her heart out for the workers in the textile and garment factories. It was the Prime Minister, unfortunately, who, like Fiddler on the Roof, year in, year out, raises expectation beyond wildest dreams. The people know that the government is fake. Facts and figures from our annual report, for example, of MCB Focus, and findings of analysis of the budget today are revealing. The writing's on the wall, and there's no need to look for devils in the details. Economy, Madam Speaker, has been mismanaged. And when there's no fiscal space due to massive public debt, there's no miracle solution. No, we need a dream team to honor debt obligation. Either one, cut down expenses, borrow excessively, or like Oliver Twist, ask for more grants and concessions. Of course, from whom? From global powers. When all the avenues have been exhausted, I, for one, did not expect any bank robbery. This government will go down in history as the only government that has decided to raid the vault of a bank because it is cash-strapped, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, before I come to ground reality, let me make a brief comment on the ruling by the ICG on Chagos and the massive support obtained on the 25th of May 2019 at the UN General Assembly. This is a non-partisan issue, and successive governments deserve to be congratulated. Referring the case to the International Court of Justice was the inevitable outcome of the favorable ruling given by the International Arbitration and the United Nations Convention Law of the Sea. All prime ministers since independence deserve our congratulations. I hope Prime Minister reconvene the Joint Opposition Government Committee. We're all in it together. I had a meeting with the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Emily Thornberry, in London, at her office in March 2018. But let me tell you one thing. The agenda is not decided by the UK ministers or government of the day, but by the Foreign Commonwealth Office. And I would say no more except to issue a note of caution over the divide and rule agenda. We have to keep our brothers and sisters of the Chagosian community close to us. We indeed are one. I must say, the landscape has changed and it is different, and the odds are very much against the British. There is, however, an opportunity to grasp. It is precisely the reason I will make a proposal, and I hope it will be food for thought. As an ocean citizen, I ride with the tidal waves to impress upon the regime the potential of our ocean. The Prime Minister should not miss any opportunity before the representatives of the international community and the nation to make an announcement for the good of humanity. He should invite the international community to join hands with the ocean state of the Republic of Mauritius. The Republic of Mauritius should announce the setting up of the biggest marine protected area of the world, a potential world heritage like Apravasigat and Le Monde. It would be a game changer, not only putting ecological values high on our economic agenda, but building more pressures for our UK friends to unconditionally withdraw its colonial, I quote, its colonial administration from the area, from our territory, within the 6 months. If the decision is taken, there would be sustainable support from all citizens of the world. We can showcase the Republic of Mauritius as the ecological ocean. It would facilitate the resettlement of our Chagosian brothers and sisters of Mauritian origin. The marine protected area would be a great carbon sink and revenue generator. We could learn from the experience of Seychelles, with whom we co-manage an extended continental shelf. This is visionary. We could make Mauritius the world meeting place for blue economy. Yes, we can make Mauritius great. Let me now, Madam Speaker, come to ground realities, which have been highlighted over and over again. But it's never enough to repeat and to reinforce what is relevant. All macroeconomic indicators, except for inflation, reflect the precariousness of our economy. Inflation is low because the price of oil has been stable at an average price of $60 per barrel since 2014. Yet, government at its mandate promised to cut the price of petroleum products by 10 rupees a litre. But instead, the contribution to the Build Mauritius Fund was raised from 1 rupee to more than 4 rupees per litre for affordable potable water on a 24-hour basis. Water, but not many drops to clean and wash and drink unless there is fury and fire from the people. We were friends from government bench when the constituents wanted to put legitimate question to them. I'm sure no one was hiding in the water closet. In politics, we need to have rhino skin and face the music. And I'll come back to the petroleum price, Madam Speaker. And the comments made by Professor Swali Kassanelli are very pertinent and striking. I quote, depuis 2015, le gouvernement a récolté des milliards sur le prix des carburants et ne retourne que quelques sous aujourd'hui. Je suis déçu. Même le prix de gaz connaît une baisse mondiale et cette mesure budgétaire n'a rien d'extraordinaire. This is the naked truth. And the Dream Team promised sound fiscal and monetary policy and growth rate of 5.5% of GDP, creation of 20,000 jobs annually, and massive investment from both public and private sectors. Hardly any quality investment with gainful employment. Instead, the country was left with a total public debt of 70% of our GDP, and the budget deficit is forecast to reach in the financial year 2019-2020 6.6% of our GDP. Unemployment amongst our youth is 25.5%. Thanks God, the regime didn't have to face the triple crisis which we did in 2007-2010. Otherwise, there would have been perte d'emploi à une vitesse vertigineuse. Madam Speaker, no one is going to be mistaken on what is obvious, because government has already opted to allow the rupee to depreciate in a staggered manner on a massive scale. And this is not the way to turbocharge the economy. It is the consequence of poor debt servicing capacity. When there's a basket of projects, Madam Speaker, there should be a balance in public expenditure and not narrow the fiscal space. We cannot swallow more than what we can chew. And as PS, together with the Minister of Economic Planning, I'm sure you assess the varying economic viability of projects, and the implementation was staggered to meet debt obligations. First, we have to do away with archaic, outdated line-by-line budget. An effective program-based budgeting has to be introduced. Everything has to be assessed, measured, and tightly scrutinized. Thorough analysis with key performance indicators is mandatory. Madam Speaker, it's not that I want to call the bluff of prime ministers, but many questions put in this very House have remained unanswered. And I want Prime Minister to disclose the hidden costs in respect of tramway project that have been conveniently parked in other budgetary and non-budgetary lines. And people are thirsty for information. This is a country where without any legislation, people want information because they need to be appropriately informed. They don't want hearsay. And we invited the Minister of Infrastructure, Land Transport to have an interface meeting with the residents of Belrose and Catmore. Promises were made, but promises are yet to be honored, Madam Speaker. People want to have facts. People want to know whether the ultimate cost of a project would not have extensive cost overrun. But one thing is certain, what is financially feasible because of grants and concessionary loan will not always be economically viable. And the latest figure on public debt, as at March 2019, is a staggering 318 billion rupees and accounts for 65% of our GDP. This is unprecedented. The figure is frightening. And despite adjustment items from non-financial public enterprises and the withdrawal 1.1% of our GDP, the debt remains very high. And when we talk of total public debt being as high as 70%, there is concern. And the concern is deep-seated, Madam Speaker. And we know the reason as to why the debt is so huge and there's no fiscal space, Madam Speaker. I don't want to make any comparison. But one thing is certain. On all indicators, with respect to financial management, the Labour Party government did far better and outpaced this government by miles, Madam Speaker. These are, and if you want, I can quote you. You want me to highlight all the figures? I will spare you. I will spare you the pain of listening to what I have to say.
Order.
Madam Speaker, as of now, each citizen has a massive debt of 300,000 rupees. A nation saddled with an increasing debt because of an irresponsible government has gone on a spending spree like there is no tomorrow.
Please, order.
Please,
Order, please.
I know it hurts.
Order.
I know it hurts.
No remarks
Take it
from
easy.
the
Take it easy.
opposition.
Easy does it, Minister Mehta. Easy does it. Do we have the capacity to repay the loan that has been extended to us? Who will pay for the dismantling of BI, the unwarranted broker's fee, the loan extended to a company for investment in Kenya with an alleged guarantee from Kenyan government? Nobody dared to ask the president of Kenya on his state visit if there was a fat chance of a single dime being refunded, Madam Speaker. The consequences are far-reaching, and there has been flight of foreign direct investment from State Bank of Mauritius. And many shareholders have sold their shares, and the value has dropped by more than 50%. As far as Mobank is concerned, not even the smallest audit firm wants to assess the financial viability of Mobank. Please don't mention actuarial review. The bank is insolvent, simply hanging on taxpayers' money for its day-to-day running. Impressing upon non-financial public sector entities like National Pension Fund, CEB, or financial public companies like SBM to invest in government securities for consolidation or adjustment of the budget to narrow the budget deficit is intellectually dishonest. But we cannot talk simply of assets. What about the liabilities of these companies? Postponing the day of reckoning, sweeping them under the carpet for the bookkeeping of government doesn't help, Madam Speaker. The non-financial public sector enterprises prefer not to invest in government security despite pressure being brought upon them for good measure. Why should they tie their hands if they can obtain better rate of interest elsewhere? Madam Speaker, I know the 8 billion reserve of CB is there for the take, and I hope it doesn't happen. I hope the staff association will be consulted. I hope all the relevant information will be disseminated. Please, don't, by all means, don't have a dig at money which do not belong to you. Madam Speaker, let me, however, come on one issue where I want to make the comparison. With respect to investment in capital project, and if there's no investment in capital project, and when the rate is not adequate, we know what happened. And a responsible government does not cut on capital spending, but strike a right balance between social and capital expenditure, like we did when we introduced free transport for the elderly, free transport for the students, when we doubled old age pensions in our first mandate. We did it because revenue was increased. We created buoyancy in the economy. There was no sunset sectors, Madam Speaker. This regime will go down as the regime which has engineered an economic crisis. It has made history as the best government that money can buy. Could they have faced a financial, a food, a fuel crisis and bring structural reform of the engine of growth of our economy without loss of jobs? Under this regime, the aim of reaching a high income status has receded. Ministers and cronies of this regime think the bastion of wisdom and can mismanage the economy, and without an effortless sense of superiority, issue a certificate of morality to the bosom pal, Mr. Alvaro Sobrino. Throughout its mandate, this government has been confrontational on political and economic front. Vendetta and mismanagement of the economy has become its hallmark. L'Alliance des Peuples is turning this country into a gambling den because of the debt it owes to whom. In its manifesto, it promised quality of life and an end to gambling. Then suddenly, gambling figures prominently in the agenda of this government. While the honesty of purpose is simply an arm-twisting exercise to swell their war chest. Compulsive gambling, Madam Speaker, is a one-way ticket to poverty and misery. It turns good people into liabilities. This regime is a spinner of liabilities. Madam Speaker, where will money come? We talk of liabilities if there's no effective revenue. If revenue from export is not forthcoming, and export of goods and services are stagnating at 200 billion rupees, what is government doing to increase receipt from export? What is government doing to re-engineer sectors which are existing sectors, and what is being done to look at emerging sectors? Nothing, Madam Speaker. Figures show that net export of goods and services, that is the balance between import and export of goods and services, which is a measure of current account deficit, is increasing dramatically and is expected to reach 115 billion rupees in 2019 compared to 69 billion in 2014. It represents 15% of GDP in 2019 compared to 11% in 2014. The deficit is of 15% of goods and services is explained by a deficit of 23% on goods and services and a surplus of 8% of GDP on services from tourism and factor service. There is a major crisis in exportation. Trend in our exportation of goods and services, as I said, is stagnating since the last 3 years, whereas under the Labour government, it was on the increase. In real terms, the effective rate has been negative over the last 3 years. Mauritius depends on exportation. We depend on investment that we need to attract. We depend on our services sector, and we have moved from an agrarian economy to a service-oriented economy. But where's our level of preparedness? What is done to see to it that we move from generic to field of specialization? What is being done to reboot the export sector? Madam Speaker, if it were not for offshore sector, the deficit of 115 billion would have been reflected in the deficit in the balance of payment. However, Mauritius benefits from huge capital inflow, which leads to a favorable balance of payment, with intensification of international pressures, which I've highlighted earlier, on our financial sector, and the revision of the double taxation avoidance convention with India, there is a substantial risk that these capital inflows will decline in the future. And if it happens, we will have a major balance of payment deficit, which will lead to a sliding rupee and financial crisis. Already, there are signs of weakening capital inflow, Madam Speaker. After several years, the balance of payment witnessed a deficit in both the third and the fourth quarter of 2018. These are dire warning signs. It is imperative that we reboot our export sectors so that we are no longer vulnerable to capital flows. Another way of reducing these risks of financial crisis is to boost saving rates in order to reduce deficits on goods and services. Our saving rates, unfortunately, Madam Speaker, is abysmally low. It has fallen to less than 10% of GDP. In 2018, it was a record low of 9%. As I've stated, the Prime Minister has given some micro goodies across the board, but has failed lamentably on macroeconomics, and a financial crisis is looming. Madam Speaker, on the 8th of January, I wrote an article which appeared in the reader's column of a daily, and it was entitled, "Don't Touch Our Reserves." I was inspired to write the article following the resignation of the Governor of the Bank of India, Mr. Raghuram Ranjan. In India, following the resignation of the Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, Urjit Patel, the deputy, warned that governments which make inroads into central banking apparatus and decision could incur the wrath of the market. Now, if somebody was to tell me that the accounting system of the central bank is different from a commercial bank, please tell us so. But I don't think that the Governor of the Bank of India, of the Reserve Bank of India, nor his deputy was wrong to talk of the wrath of the market that could be incurred by undermining the independence of institutions. Raghuram Rajan, a top brass economist, stated that the Reserve Bank of India's government resignation should be seen as a note of protest. He made it clear that the extreme change for which the Reserve Bank of India Board was given more operational authority violates the principle of how the Reserve Bank of India used to operate and should operate. In other words, government should not interfere. The Economic Intelligence Unit has forwarded us that we cannot forever live on borrowed time and borrowed money. And I put the question then, as far back as January 29, is the Prime Minister contemplating part of the Reserve Bank of Mauritius to rig the electoral process? Be it in India, Mauritius, or New Zealand, or any part of the world, very few people give a damn, unfortunately, about technical issues of the central bank reserves and a capital adequacy ratio of commercial banks. It is not because we live only once that we should leave it to the next generation to bail out this country. We are not India, which has a vast internal market. Even India cannot give up on global economic integration. India, on the threshold of general election, can temporarily afford to give up on global economic integration. But for a small island developing state like Mauritius, only fools can ride the wave of populism politics at the expense of our credibility. The governor of the Bank of Mauritius, unfortunately, bends to the whims of this government, unlike the former governor of India, Mr. Raghuram Rajan. Madam Speaker, the issue in India is about the level of capital and reserve of the Reserve Bank of India, which is high, around 20% of total assets. I don't have the information as to the percentage of asset of the Bank of Mauritius. But the Bank of Mauritius Act, the provisions governing the Bank of Mauritius Act are clear. Under no circumstances should the Special Reserve Fund of the Bank of Mauritius be used to finance vote-catching scheme or debt incurred by government. Under Section 47 of the Bank of Mauritius Act, there are provisions to use the Special Reserves Fund for two purposes. One, to recapitalize the Bank of Mauritius, and B, for the conduct of monetary operation. The proposed amendment in Part C1A8 is a retrograde step in central bank legislation. We had over the years had the benefit of IMF experts to model our legislation, our central banking legislation. Now, by the stroke of this retrograde amendment, the Minister of Finance can use the special reserve for fiscal purposes. What the government is doing, it is laying its hands over a sum of nearly 14 billion rupees to finance government expenditure. Madam Speaker, there is a vast difference between foreign exchange reserve and special reserve fund. To me and to the nation at large, what this government is attempting to do is tantamount to broad light robbery by night raiders, Madam Speaker. This amendment is a license to robbers to raid the Bank of Mauritius. It shows an utter failure of the regime to look for other sources of revenue. Unfortunately, some stoop to please the political masters, even if they have to bend backwards. There is a heavy price to pay when errant boys are appointed to head institutions which should be fiercely independent. The Bank of Mauritius cannot dance to the tune of any piper, however heavy-handed the latter is. Many economic policies have to be sound, and it is the responsibility of the Monetary Policy Committee to fulfill its mandate. There is an absolute necessity for clarity, and certainty on inflation, on interest rate, and on the impact on GDP. These microeconomic factors will be measured and quantified. The consumers, the buyer, the seller, the investor, the tourist want predictability and reliability on exchange rate, parity on exchange rate, and targeted inflation. Madam Speaker, IMF is traditionally a strong proponent of independence of institutions, a strong proponent of a strongly independent central bank. And it would appear now that the IMF has doubts as regards the independence of the Bank of Mauritius and possibly the Financial Services Commission. I suspect the private sector, or even the governor, or the deputy governor must have spoken, or another deputy governor must have spoken in private to the IMF about the political role and closeness of people working at the Bank of Mauritius, closest to government. Madam Speaker, as I say, this government is making history. No minister of finance since colonial days has used the Bank of Mauritius Special Reserves Fund to meet debt obligations. And the amount targeted for Bank of Mauritius financing is 18.4 billion rupees. I don't know what the outcome would be. Much has been written in the press. I know some people are saying that it's not an unknown habit. It's not something that is not done. Australia has done it, or India did it. But, Madam Speaker, as I've said, we're a small island developing state. We cannot amend the legislation for fiscal policy to override monetary policy, to enable government or the minister, through the Minister of Finance, to have an upper hand. And because government has failed utterly and abysmally to manage the financial sector and the economy of this country, it cannot certainly have its hand upon money that belongs to the nation, Madam Speaker. There should be no complicity, either from the governor and the board. Madam Speaker, the Bank of Mauritius, the Financial Services Commission, the non-financial assets enterprises are being assailed. Reserves are being depleted. And there's a reserve surplus from FSC, from the special funds, which amounts to 2.7 billion over 2 years. I'll have in mind, the special reserve fund. There's talk of sale of non-financial asset enterprise to raise 11 billion. Which national financial asset? Frantically, Madam Speaker, it reminds me of a gambler who has lost massively and now is looking for money under the mattress and is even willing to break the safe box of his kids. What else remains for this government to do, Madam Speaker? What else remains for the government? They are selling the silverware of the nation. They have their hands in all the pies where reserves are. And when they cannot settle debt incurred, what else remains for them to do, Madam Speaker? This is what I call a jackass policy. This government is game for a laugh, a comedy rooted in the tragic realities of its downfall. Their concern is not the country, but the swelling of the waters. And when the country is in financial straits, what do the regime talk of? Concessions for implementation of projects, build, operate, transfer, public-private partnership. And I was shocked when I read that the regime is abandoning social housing projects to the private sector. This is the state where this is the state largely due to mismanagement of our economy. This is where we are. Now, we have to talk of concessions. When we've run out of cash, it's private-public partnership. but project. And as I stated earlier, from middle income trap, we are falling into the debt trap diplomacy. And as a special consolation, what are we being told? 1,050 housing units will be constructed by Saudi fund. When? You can guess, in 2021 to 2021, 2022. And I hope by the time the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman will authoritatively tell the world who were behind the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, Madam Speaker. As for the financing of 6,800 units by Exim Bank of China, it's a dream shattered, Madam Speaker. Let me quote an excerpt from an article written by a fine economist. Projects contracted loosely to public or private entities carry heavy risks of improper evaluation. As for Heritage City, the multi-sport complex of Côte d'Or, Safe City, and they are associated with sizable wastage and potential cost overrun and offer greater scope for corruption, unquote. Madam Speaker, much has been said on job creation. I will leave it to my good friends to take up this issue. But the fact remains that in year 2018, there were job loss of 1,400. And in 2016, hardly 300 jobs were created. Madam Speaker, let me, I don't know how many minutes do I know? Just, let me, since time is running short, let me come to the sugarcane industry. Well, now, I know there has been much debate in the House over the reform and restructuration of the sugar industry. Government has decided to disburse certain sum of money and come with a package of incentives. But in my humble opinion, government has to spell out clearly whether it wants to have a sugarcane industry. And if it wants to have a sugarcane industry, we have to put all efforts, we have to put in all efforts to save the sector and to turn it into a viable sugarcane industry. Sugarcane is the best carbon dioxide gas. It has a multifunctional dimension. It makes our environment pristine. And as I've said in the past, there's an organic link between millers, planters, and the community at large. Small planters produce around 54,541 tons of sugar. That is 17% of total production. But the time has come to bring all the partners together. What we need is dialogue, consultation, allow people to exchange information, to share views, but to reach ultimately consensus. The whole nation wants this sector to stay, to be viable, and as government, we have a responsibility. It's time to do away with the Sugar Industry Efficiency Act and come with the Sugarcane Industry Efficiency Act. What we are saying, we are talking of equitable distribution of proceeds obtained from the sale of sugar and its byproducts. And this sector has thrived, Madam Speaker, on a remunerative price and on market access. These days are gone. But what beats me and what I can't understand, we have a remunerative market for the small planters in Mauritius. I see no reason why there should be dumping of raw sugar from the region. This commodity should be on the list of sensitive products. And the sugar price on the local market is as high as 36,000 rupees per ton. Since the market is there for the take, why should this market not go to the small planters, Madam Speaker? There are several partners in this sector. The corporate mill, and rightly so, have used the proceeds to widen the economic base and to create employment. But they have had, and rightly so, but under successive governments, fiscal incentives. They've managed to diversify the proceeds from the sale of sugarcane. But the planters, we need to help them. And I'm not going to apportion responsibility whether one government has done better than the other. But the time has come for us to come together. First, to say loud and clear that we need to reverse what we call the formula with respect to proceeds obtained from sale of sugar and its byproducts. Why is it that the proceeds from the sale of sugar should represent 80% of the whole revenue obtained from sugar and its byproduct? I make an appeal to the minister, asking World Bank to conduct studies is not good enough. I think the reports are there. The findings have been submitted. We have people who know the sector inside out. We have people who as a result of experience acquired overseas, can be of tremendous help. There are people, irrespective whether they're from the corporate sector or they are from the trade union or from the planters community. They are willing to come together as one people, as one nation, to turn this sector into a viable sector. There is no room for demagogy in this sector. But for God's sake, let us be fair to the planters. Let us be fair to the workers of the sugar industry. And it is this sector which has subsidized the other productive sectors of the economy for years and years. I hope, and the minister has given his solemn word to the trade unionists, that workers who opt to retire will, from the workers of the sugarcane industry, those who work in the factory will be entitled to the blueprint, and those who work in the fields will be entitled to the provisions of VRS2. If the package can be improved, or if there's an alternative, fair enough. But we should not undermine their rights, and we should not undermine what we consider to be their rights. This is a sector which has enabled this country to take off. This is a sector which is becoming a service-oriented sector. And as a result of experience acquired in this sector, today we are maverick on the continent of Africa. This is a classical and a good example of cross-border initiative. Madam Speaker, time has come not to waste time. Time has come to convene all partners to make sure that we give a fair hearing and the proceeds from a standing cane are equitably distributed, Madam Speaker. There is no need to obtain funding, be it from CBO or elsewhere, and then the cost to be borne by consumers. This is not fair, and we need to invest in research and development. When the bill on research, Mauritius Research Innovative Council was debated, I made several proposals, and I hope they've been taken on board. Madam Speaker, there's another sector, there's another issue which I consider to be a cross-cutting issue, the drug issue. And I don't think that it's fair for any one of us to hit at each other. Because if we want to play politics on a scourge which is afflicting many of our young people, it's time wasted. We can harness our resources to wage war on this scourge. They are the findings of the national findings submitted by the United Nations Drugs and Crime. But what I can't understand, on this cross-cutting issue, like the issue of Chagos, why is it that there is no representation of members of the opposition on the committee? Why are we debarred from attending these meetings? I can't understand. This goes against parliamentary democracy. And it is not and I can't understand why government flouts parliamentary democracy. And let me tell our friends, some of them have made unwarranted remarks, because some of them want to be vicious. I don't intend to be vicious. If I want to be vicious, I can wear my boogies and start hitting around. I don't want to do that. But let me impress upon them that I'm not going to talk of what happened in the past, which political parties have obtained funding from whom. But if there is honesty of purpose, let us mobilize our strength, act in unison, in the spirit of patriotism. Let us wage war on drugs. I don't know why there is murmur on the other side. But let me tell the Prime Minister, and the leader of the opposition was right. If there is a missing link, there are many missing links, but one missing link that should not have been missed in the budget is in respect of the findings of the report submitted by Lam Shanglin. There are two reports, the Lam Shanglin report and the master plan of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. So we want to know where we stand. I agree much is being done, but this problem is a national scourge, and it's on the rise. We don't know much of where we stand. We don't know where we stand in respect of rehabilitation, rehabilitation, reinsertion of our youth. And the other day I raised the case of a young chap victim of, who has consumed a psychotic drug, the synthetic drug. What is the purpose of throwing this chap, this young man, into jail? What we have said at party level, that we have the demarcation line between a consumer and a trafficker should be wide. What a young consumer, what we need to do if we are humane, and our approach is based on the feelings of being a human being, is to rehabilitate, is to make sure that we save this child, Madam Speaker, or this teenager. So the politics of rehabilitation, reinsertion is of vital importance. Nothing is said. Let me, Madam Speaker, by way of conclusion, say loud and clear that the end is nigh for this government, and time for them, if they can muster the courage to go for dissolution of Parliament. This is the wish of the electorate. What the people want new elections. We are ready and willing. We have the team, not a dream team, but people who are pragmatic and relevant, Madam Speaker, and who will fight for a cause which is just, who can reconcile social and economic factors, who will put people first, Madam Speaker. And I can tell them, we are a party, Madam Speaker, which
Order.
We are a party, Madam Speaker.
Order.
We are a party which value the importance of being humane. And unlike this government, there was no broad daylight robbery who will ever raid the vault of a bank. They are going to do it. They will have to assume the responsibility, and they will have to bear the brunt of the electorate. Thank you, Madam Speaker.